"Get out the car, now." Those were the first words that hit Nathaniel's ears as the police cruiser's lights flashed behind him, cutting through the quiet of the night like a knife. It was supposed to be a regular drive home after a day. At school, he'd just finished a presentation in class, one he'd worked on for weeks, and he couldn't wait to get back to his room, plug in his laptop, and start sketching ideas for his next graphic design project. His life was simple. He was just a 16-year-old high school student with a love for art, dreams of getting into a good college, and a strong bond with his older sister Maya, who had been like a mother to him since their parents passed away years ago. But now, as he looked in the rearview mirror, his heart skipped a beat. The flashing blue and red lights felt like a spotlight, casting a shadow over the warm evening. He had done nothing wrong, nothing that warranted this attention. He wasn't speeding. He wasn't swerving. His hands, steady on the wheel, gripped tighter, the engine purring softly as he slowed down, instinctively pulling to the shoulder of the road. He checked the speedometer again, 45 miles per hour in a 45-mile zone. Everything was in order, but then the door opened. A rush of cold air hit him as one of the officers slammed it open, yanking him out of his seat. His legs tangled, and before he could make sense of what was happening, his head hit the asphalt with a sickening thud. The world went dark for a moment, and when it came back into focus, there were 3 cops on top of him, pummeling him, kicking him in the ribs, their boots coming down with the weight of a world he didn't understand. "I didn't do anything." Nathaniel tried to scream, but it was lost in the dust, his words muffled by the air being knocked from his lungs. His heart raced as their fists and boots broke across his ribs, cracked his teeth, and left him gasping, the pain shooting through him in waves. Nothing made sense, the force, the brutality. Why him? Maya had always warned him about how dangerous the streets could be. She always said, no matter how careful you are, no matter how good you are, they won't care. They'll see you as just another face, just another number. She always feared for him. And now, as he lay there, his vision fading and his body trembling, he realized how right she had been. The police didn't care that he was a good kid. They didn't care that he was on the verge of earning a scholarship, that he worked part-time to help pay for his textbooks, that he had dreams, that he was someone's son, someone's brother. They saw him as a target, and that's all that mattered. To them, he wasn't human. He was just a black kid in a neighborhood they didn't understand. The officer in charge was Officer Riker, a man whose face Nathaniel would never forget, though he would never get the chance to learn his name at that moment. Riker's voice was a sharp bark as he screamed, "Stop resisting," over and over, even though Nathaniel hadn't moved. He was already on the ground, limbs crushed beneath, the weight of 3 grown men. But the pain didn't stop. The officers didn't stop. Somewhere in the distance, he heard Maya's voice, her soft whispers of encouragement, her cries when she found out about the traffic stop. But the voice in his head was drowned by the roar of the police car's engine as it sped away into the night, leaving him on the pavement, barely conscious. Minutes later, Maya would get the call. Her worst fear, the one she had tried to shield Nathaniel from, had come true. Her little brother was lying in a hospital, bed with broken bones, his jaw wired shut, his eyes swollen shut, and his body covered in bruises. She'd been there before. She'd fought battles before, ones of survival and survival alone. But now, it was different. This time, it wasn't just about surviving, it was about something more. It was about fighting back for Nathaniel, for justice, for the life they deserved. But Maya wasn't just angry. She was ready to make them feel the same fear she had felt when they laid her brother out on the asphalt. Ready to make them feel every ounce of pain and rage and helplessness that had been inflicted on her family. And that night, when she declared war, the battle was only just beginning. The phone call came just after midnight. The shrill ring cut through the stillness of Maya's small apartment, slicing through the silence like a knife. Her heart stopped for just a beat before the familiar voice on the other end spoke, and the words tumbled out, sharp and cold. "Maya, ... it's Nathaniel. He's been hurt. He's in the hospital." Her breath caught in her chest, but she couldn't speak. The world around her slowed down as she grabbed the phone tighter, as if somehow holding it closer would keep the reality of the words from hitting her. Got Nathaniel, her baby brother, hurt. The nurse on the other end explained as best she could, but the details were sparse. Critical condition, head injury, broken bones. She couldn't offer anything more concrete, and Maya didn't know whether she should hang up and rush to the hospital or keep listening to a voice that felt like it belonged to someone else's life. Maya's fingers gripped the edge of the kitchen counter as she tried to make sense of it, but the panic was starting to consume her. She was all Nathaniel had left, all the protection he would ever need. They'd been through everything together after their parents died in that car accident, just the two of them, learning how to survive in a world that often felt too cold to care. Maya had taken on the role of mother, father, protector, and friend. She'd kept him grounded, kept him safe, kept him from falling through the cracks of a broken system that had swallowed so many others. But now, as she stood there in the dim kitchen light, she knew nothing had prepared her for this. Maya didn't even know what was happening yet, but she felt it. That terrible gnawing in her stomach that told her the worst had already happened. Nathaniel didn't deserve this. He was just a kid. A good kid, and yet, here he was, lying somewhere with broken bones, a broken jaw, and a future now uncertain. All because of a traffic stop. The anger surged in her chest like a tidal wave. It began as a dull burn, but it didn't take long for it to turn into full-blown rage. Her brother was fighting for his life, and the people who did this were still out there, wearing badges and walking free. They would keep doing it. They'd keep hurting people, black people, as long as there were no consequences, as long as they could hide behind their uniforms. It didn't matter how hard they tried to be good, how much they prayed, or how many dreams they had. It would never matter to them. To the system, Nathaniel was just another number, just another kid caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. But Maya wasn't going to let this go. She couldn't. She wouldn't. Maya's old car screeched to a halt in front of the hospital. The city was silent around her, the streets deserted, the night hanging heavy in the air. It felt like the world was holding its breath, as if waiting for something. But Maya couldn't wait any longer. She slammed the door behind her and rushed through the hospital doors. The sterile smell of disinfectant and the sound of distant beeping machines hitting her all at once. Her mind was spinning. What if it was too late? What if she was too late? The nurse at the front desk barely looked up as she rushed past. She didn't need to check in. She was Maya Bennett, and the world knew that when it came to her brother, nothing else mattered. Nothing would stop her from getting to Nathaniel. She followed the hallway like it was a path she'd walked 1,000 times. But every step felt like a new world she hadn't prepared for. The sound of the fluorescent lights buzzing above her seemed deafening. She walked faster, ignoring the tightness in her chest, the way her legs felt heavy, like lead. She had to keep moving. She had to see him. When she finally reached the room, she stopped at the door, her hand hovering above the knob for just a second. The air was thick in there, heavy with the weight of all the pain that had accumulated inside these sterile walls. Inside, Nathaniel was hooked up to machines, wires trailing from his body like a lifeline. His face, once so full of life, was now swollen and bruised beyond recognition. His lips were cracked, and his jaw was wired shut, but Maya could see the faint rise and fall of his chest. He was still breathing. He's still here. He's still here, but he wasn't okay. And neither was she. Her fingers trembled as she touched the doorframe, and a quiet sob escaped her throat. She tried to hide it, tried to force the tears back, but they came anyway. Her brother, the boy she raised, was lying in a hospital bed, broken, and it felt like a piece of her was being torn away with every second she spent standing there, looking at him. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not to him, not to them. They had survived everything, every day, just trying to stay afloat. But this was different. Maya finally stepped inside, her legs shaky beneath her as she walked to his side. She reached for his hand, and when her fingers closed around his, she felt a flicker of warmth. It wasn't much, but it was something. "Hey," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "It's me. I'm here. I got you. You're gonna be okay. I promise. Just hold on." But even as she said the words, she knew it wasn't that simple. This wasn't just about keeping Nathaniel alive. This was about something bigger, about fighting back, fighting for him, for everything they had been through, fighting for their future. Maya felt something inside her shift. A fire had started inside her, a fire that had been smoldering for years, built from all the times she had been forced to sit on her hands, to keep her mouth shut, to swallow the injustices that had been done to her, to Nathaniel, to everyone who had ever been hurt by the system, but not anymore. She wasn't going to stand by and watch as her brother's life was ripped apart by a system that didn't care about him. And she wasn't going to stand by while those cops walked free, their actions ignored, their violence dismissed as just part of the job. Maya stood there in the quiet of that room, watching her brother's chest rise and fall, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders. The tears she had been holding back started to fall again, but they weren't for Nathaniel anymore. They were for justice, for everything that had been taken from them, for every broken promise, every moment of fear, every time she'd seen her brother's life threatened because of the color of his skin. This wasn't about being a victim anymore, Dot. It was about fighting back. Maya stepped out of the room, her face hardening as she wiped the last of the tears away. She wasn't done yet. This was just the beginning. Her hands were clenched into fists as she made her way back to her car. The world hadn't stopped, but her world had just shifted. She knew what she had to do. She wasn't going to fight this with anger. She wasn't going to fight it with violence. She was going to fight it with strategy, with purpose, and with the understanding that the system was broken, and it would take someone like her to fix it. The drive home felt different. The streets felt different. Everything felt different now. The rage was building inside her, but it wasn't just rage. It was purpose, clarity. She wasn't going to let this go, and she wasn't going to let her brother's pain go unnoticed. Maya didn't go home that night. After the hospital, after seeing her brother lying unconscious and broken, her mind wouldn't let her rest. She was supposed to be his protector. She was supposed to keep him safe from a world that had never been kind to them. But now, she had failed Dot as the car's engine hummed beneath her. Maya tried to push the thoughts of Nathaniel's bloodied face from her mind. But every time she closed her eyes, all she saw were those swollen lips, those unrecognizable features, the bruises that covered his body like a map of violence. She couldn't ignore it. She wouldn't. Pulling into her driveway, she killed the engine but stayed in the car for a moment, the stillness of the night pressing in on her. The world outside seemed oblivious to the storm that was gathering inside. Her justice, she thought. It wasn't just something she wanted. It was something she needed. For Nathaniel. For herself. She grabbed her notebook from the passenger seat, flipping it open to the page she'd started earlier. She had already written down the names of the officers involved, Riker, Sanders, Dunlap, but she hadn't gotten to the part that mattered. She hadn't figured out where they lived, where they went after work, or what their routines were, the rhythm of their lives. She needed to understand them first, before she could strike, before she could do anything. Maya's mind was like a clock ticking away, each thought measured and methodical. She wasn't going to be reckless. She wasn't going to make the mistake of acting out of rage, no. She would plan. Like Leon did. The system was broken, and it was her job to break it back. The first few days were quiet. Maya watched, waited. She kept her movements slow and steady, like the wind before a storm, preparing to strike when the time was right. The officers didn't know it yet, but they were already being watched. She'd found out everything she could about Officer Riker. He was the one who'd initiated the traffic stop, the one who had grabbed Nathaniel first. She studied his schedule like a hawk circling its prey. Every day he left his home at the same time, stopped by the same coffee shop on his way to work, and picked up his kids from school at the same hour. His life was predictable, routine, easy to track if you knew what to look for. That's what. Maya needed a pattern. She'd started photographing Riker's house from a safe distance. She had her phone out and ready, always watching for the smallest crack in the facade of his normal, perfect life. She couldn't afford to miss anything. When he went for a jog in the early mornings, Maya was there, her eyes behind the lens, capturing every detail. When he took his dog for a walk, she was just around the corner, capturing the way he paused at his neighbor's house to chat, showing that beneath the tough exterior of a cop, he was just like the rest of them. A man with a family, a man with a life outside of his uniform, a man who thought he was untouchable. And then there was Sanders. The man had a routine of his own, one that Maya quickly became familiar with. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Sanders made a quick run to the local grocery store, always buying the same brand of chips, the same 12-pack of soda, and always checking his car tire pressure before he left. He was predictable, boring even, but that was exactly what Maya needed. Predictability in his actions. She saw weaknesses small, unimportant to anyone else, but not to her. They were the cracks she needed to break him open. Maya wasn't just looking at their patterns anymore. She was infiltrating their lives. She knew the layout of their homes, where their kids went to school, and the best times to catch them when they were alone. But it wasn't enough yet. Days bled into weeks, and with each one, Maya's resolve grew sharper, more focused. She was methodical, like a predator stalking its prey, learning the rhythm of its movements before closing in for the kill. But there was a part of her, a deep, knowing part, that wished she could do more. She had learned enough about Riker, Sanders, and Dunlop to know they were ordinary men with families, friends, and a sense of normalcy that Maya had once believed everyone could have. But now, that normalcy felt like a farce. Behind the family barbecues and backyard parties, there was a violence that was ingrained into them, a system that had taught them they could get away with anything, as long as they wore the badge. She followed Sanders to his family barbecue one Saturday afternoon. She watched him toss a beanbag into a hole in the ground, laughing as his kids ran through the yard, carefree and happy. In that moment, Maya almost couldn't reconcile this image with the man who had helped break her brother's body. How could someone like him, someone who seemed so normal, do what he did? But then she remembered. He wasn't normal. He was a product of a system that taught him that people like Nathaniel didn't matter. And that's when the anger started to build. The next few weeks were filled with photographs, license plate numbers, and snippets of conversations she overheard. From across the street, Maya became obsessed. Every moment of their lives mattered to her now. She was logically tracking them, studying them, but she was also breaking down the wall they had built around themselves. The cracks in their lives began to form, and with each piece of information she collected, the path to her revenge became clearer. One evening, as Maya sat in the dim light of her living room, looking at the pile of photographs she'd taken of the officers, a thought crossed her mind. Was she becoming them? She remembered Nathaniel's laughter, his excitement about his design projects, the way he always looked out for her when she came home late, the way he never asked for anything except the chance to make something of himself. And now he was in the hospital, his future uncertain. All because of them. Maya shook her head, pushing the doubt aside. No, she was doing this for him. She was doing this to make sure he didn't disappear like so many others. For every step she took, she could hear Nathaniel's voice, quiet and broken. I didn't do anything. And she would make sure that no one ever had to say those words again. The intensity was growing. It wasn't just about following the officers anymore. It was about breaking them, forcing them to face the same helplessness Nathaniel had felt that day on the asphalt. Maya had come to realize that it was never going to be enough to just expose these men. She was going to make them feel everything, and she was going to make sure they felt it every single day until they realized they had no escape from the consequences of their actions. The more she learned, the more her determination solidified. She wasn't just taking back power. She was reclaiming it. As she prepared for the next move, the tension thickened. Maya knew she couldn't afford to wait any longer. She had them. She had the perfect plan, and soon the officers would be looking over their shoulders, never knowing when the next strike would come. The clock was ticking, and Maya was ready. The quiet tension that had been building inside Maya finally reached a boiling point. It had been weeks since Nathaniel's attack, and as much as she wanted to lash out, to go full throttle into revenge, Maya knew she had to play her cards carefully. She couldn't afford to be reckless. Every step she took needed to be calculated, deliberate. This wasn't just about getting even. It was about making them feel exactly what Nathaniel had felt that night. The first strike would be a symbolic act of message, not just to the officers responsible, but to the entire system that had let them walk free. Maya had spent the last few weeks watching their every move, gathering the small, seemingly insignificant details that would make the difference. Riker had been the first officer she'd focused on. He was the one who had opened Nathaniel's car door and yanked him out, the one who had thrown the first punch. His family life seemed perfect on the surface, but Maya knew better than to take things at face value. Underneath that carefully constructed facade was a man who had abused his power, a man who needed to feel the consequences. Maya had spent hours on Riker, trailing him from his home to his favorite diner, from his morning jogs to his evening routines. She had everything she needed. She had studied his patterns, memorized his schedule, and found the perfect moment to strike. She waited until the night was deep and the streets were quiet, the calm before the storm. Maya stood outside Riker's house, a hoodie pulled low over her head, her heart beating steadily in her chest. It wasn't adrenaline that kept her calm. It was the knowledge that her next move was necessary. Just the officers had taken from her family, but now it was her turn to take something back, something much more valuable than property. It was their peace of mind. Riker's truck sat in the driveway, parked just a little too close to the curb. Maya didn't waste time. With careful precision, she crossed the street, making sure her footsteps were quiet on the wet pavement. She had no intention of being caught. This was a one-shot deal, and it had to work. She reached the front of Riker's truck. The man who had once walked with the confidence of someone who thought he was untouchable was now about to feel the weight of his own choices. Maya's eyes flicked to the door handles, the tires, the side mirrors, the trunk, all parts of the truck that Riker likely saw every day, never suspecting that they would one day betray him. In a swift, fluid motion, she pulled out a can of red spray paint from her bag. The message had to be clear. She didn't need words. She needed symbolism. The spray paint hissed as it left the can, covering the side of Riker's truck in a rush of vibrant, bleeding red. "My son's blood costs more than your badge." The words echoed in her mind as she painted. Every stroke was a blow. Every spray of color was a punch to the system that had done this to Nathaniel. She wasn't just painting on metal. She was leaving a mark, a permanent reminder that what had happened was unforgivable, and the officers would no longer walk free from their crimes. The paint was bold, striking against the dull gray of the truck. The letters were uneven, a little sloppy, but that didn't matter. What mattered was the impact. Maya stepped back, looking at the truck one last time. The red words on the side were a glaring contrast to the peaceful suburban street around her. They didn't belong here. They didn't belong in the world of comfort and safety that Riker and his kind had taken for granted. It was a reminder that there was someone watching, someone waiting. The silence around her was thick, but there was power in that silence. As she turned to leave, Maya felt a small, satisfied breath leave her chest. This was just the beginning. Riker would know. He would wake up to that truck tomorrow morning, and for the first time, he would feel like he wasn't safe anymore. Like he had done something wrong, like he could be touched. The next day, the news spread quickly, as she knew it would. Riker's truck had been parked in the same spot every night for years, but now it was no longer just a part of his suburban routine. The morning after the vandalism, Riker went outside with a coffee cup in hand, just like every other day. The same routine, the same lack of suspicion. But when he turned the corner to his driveway, he stopped dead in his tracks. Truck was there, but it wasn't just a truck anymore. The red words sprayed across the side were a message he couldn't ignore. His breath hitched, and his face drained of color as he reached out, his fingers trembling as he touched the paint. He wiped at it, but the words didn't go away. They stayed. They were permanent. They were his. Maya watched from across the street, standing just out of sight behind a large oak tree. She saw Riker's face twist in confusion, then anger, then fear. His lips moved as if trying to form words, but no sound came out. He looked around, checking the street like someone was watching. He knew someone was watching. In that moment, Maya felt the first shift in power. Riker wasn't in control anymore. He wasn't untouchable. He wasn't the one who could make the rules. He was a man, just like anyone else, vulnerable, exposed, and now he had to face the consequences. Maya didn't stay to watch him longer. There was no need. The message had been sent. Riker would have to deal with the fear and the shame now. But it didn't end with Riker. Sanders was next. Maya knew Sanders wasn't going to be as easy to rattle. The man had a way of walking with a kind of invincible arrogance. He had the kind of family, the kind of life that looked perfect on the outside. But Maya had been watching long enough to know that the cracks were there, waiting to be exposed. She just needed to find the right moment to strike. One evening, she learned that Sanders always parked his car around the back of his house when he returned from work. It was a small detail, a weakness. And that's exactly what Maya had been looking for. She parked down the street, far enough away to avoid suspicion, but close enough to see him come home. The moment he turned his car into the alley behind his house, Maya's heart raced. She slipped out of her car and walked to the back of his property, where she could see his backyard through the iron gate. He was just a few steps from the garage when she reached for the box cutter she had brought with her. The cutting of the tires was clean, precise. No one would know it was her. No one but him. Sanders would know. As the first tire deflated with a soft hiss, Maya felt a quiet satisfaction. The tire was only the beginning. The damage was not just physical, it was emotional. The more she messed with his perfect life, the more she chipped away at his confidence. Maya was targeting his world, the one he thought was invulnerable. The fear didn't take long to settle in. The officers, once certain that they were safe in their world of authority, began to feel like prey. Riker's truck, Sanders' tires, the mounting pressure, it all started to gnaw at them. Their once comfortable lives were becoming unraveling. Threads. The officers began to change. Their confidence started to crumble. They began to look over their shoulders, checking their cars before getting in, glancing at their windows, wondering who was watching. They started to question everything. Were they being watched? Was there something more to all these strange occurrences? And for the first time, they felt it, the weight of fear. The fear of the unknown. The fear of consequences. But Maya didn't want them to break yet. She wanted them to feel it. She wanted them to sweat. She wanted them to know they couldn't hide anymore. Every small disruption, every little detail she exposed, took them one step closer to realizing that their lives weren't their own anymore. This was only the beginning. As the days passed, Maya found herself sinking deeper into her mission. She had already made her mark, and the officers Riker, Sanders, and Dunlop were feeling it. But as much as she enjoyed watching them sweat, she knew one thing had become clear. She couldn't keep doing this alone. To bring them down too, really make a change, she needed help. She needed others who felt the same way she did, who were willing to sacrifice and fight for something greater than just personal revenge. There were people out there who were angry about what had happened to Nathaniel. People who understood the injustice of it all. People who had their own stories, their own reasons to fight back. Maya had always been independent, a lone wolf, but now she could feel the weight of the task ahead of her. She needed a team. The first person Maya called was Jordan. She'd known him for years, ever since her college days when she studied criminal justice. Jordan had a military background. He was a former soldier who had seen more than his share of violence and brutality. He'd left the military disillusioned, tired of fighting wars for causes that didn't align with his own beliefs. Now he ran a small security business in the city, and Maya knew he'd be the first person to understand the stakes of what she was about to do. She reached him on the second ring. "Yo, Maya, what's up?" Jordan's voice was calm, steady, like it always was. "I need your help," Maya said, her voice low, purposeful. "I've got a plan, and I can't do it alone. It's time to make them pay for what they did to Nathaniel." Jordan was silent for a moment, and Maya could almost hear the gears turning in his mind. He'd always been the quiet type, the kind of guy who didn't rush to action, but thought things through carefully. "I'm listening," he said finally. Maya gave him the rundown: the cops, the attack on her brother, the slow, methodical revenge she'd already begun. She told him about the message she'd sent to Riker, about the fear she was starting to see in their lives. It was all strategic, but now it was time to escalate. She needed someone like Jordan, someone who knew how to use force when necessary, but also understood the importance of precision. "I'll help," Jordan said, without hesitation. "But this can't just be about hurting people. We need to make sure we bring them down for good." Maya smiled, though he couldn't see it. She knew he understood. Next, Maya turned to Eva. Eva was an activist, someone Maya had met at a protest for police brutality a few years ago. Eva was loud, passionate, and utterly fearless. She had been fighting the system her whole life, organizing marches, speaking out against inequality, and rallying communities to fight back. Maya found her on social media. Eva had just posted a fiery status about the continued mistreatment of black and brown people by the police. Maya sent her a message. "Maya, I need your help. We need to bring change. You're the person who can help make that happen." It didn't take long for Eva to respond. "Eva, I'm in. Let's make some noise." The third person Maya called was Zach, a tech expert who had once worked for a cybersecurity company. Zach was a quiet genius, the kind of guy who could disappear into a room full of computers and not be heard from for hours. He was a bit of a recluse, not a typical activist, but Maya knew he had the skills she needed. When Zach answered, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Maya, what's going on?" "I need you to help me dig into these officers' pasts," she said, getting straight to the point. "Find anything, everything. We need to expose them. Not just for what they did to Nathaniel, but for everything they've done under the radar." Zach paused, then replied, "I'm in. I've been waiting for a reason to take them down." With Jordan, Eva, and Zach now on her side, Maya felt the weight of her decision settle in her chest. They weren't just allies, they were the beginning of something bigger. She had the tools she needed to bring the officers to their knees. But even more than that, she had a team of people who understood the cost of what she was asking them to do. They were doing this for justice, not just for Nathaniel, but for everyone who had been wronged by the system. Maya had led them this far, but now it was time to trust them to lead with her. They began meeting at a warehouse on the outskirts of town, an abandoned place, hidden away from the eyes of the public. It was perfect for their secret operations. There, Maya laid out the details of her plan. "Riker's the key," Maya said, standing at the head of the table. "We hit him first. His life's the most exposed. He's the one who'll crack first when things start falling apart." Jordan leaned forward, his fingers tapping on the table. "How do we get to him? What's the first move?" Maya looked at Eva and Zach, then back at Jordan. "We know where he lives, what he does every day. We know his weak spots, his family, his routine. That's where we strike. He's the one who started all of this, and it's time to make him feel the same fear we felt." Eva nodded. "And once we take down Riker, the others will start to crumble. We can take them down one by one, piece by piece. But we can't just destroy their lives. We need to expose them, make sure the world knows who they really are." Zach, ever the quiet one, spoke up. "I can hack their phones. I can get into their personal records, their emails, their social media accounts. We'll have everything, but we'll need time to cover our tracks." Maya smiled, feeling the first true sense of hope since Nathaniel had been attacked. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about change. They weren't just fighting for Nathaniel. They were fighting for everyone who had ever been wronged by the police. They were fighting for something bigger than themselves. "Let's do this," Maya said, her voice steady. "We don't just want them scared. We want them to know we're coming for them. We're going to break the system, one officer at a time." Over the next few weeks, the team became closer, more efficient. Jordan trained Eva and Zach in tactical moves, showing them how to handle pressure, how to stay calm in the face of danger. Eva organized protests in the background, raising awareness of the officers' wrongdoings, while Zach worked tirelessly in the shadows, gathering information, piecing together the officers' pasts. The tension in the group was palpable. Maya had known all along that they would have to walk a fine line between being discreet and being powerful. But it was working. They were making progress. One night, as the team gathered in the warehouse to review their findings, Maya felt the shift. In her heart. This was it. They were ready. They had the information. They had the motivation. They were no longer just a group of individuals. They were a force, and together, they were going to make sure the officers who had wronged Nathaniel felt the weight of their actions. The air around Maya felt thick with anticipation. For weeks, she had meticulously planned every step of her operation. The tension in the warehouse had never been higher. Her team had gathered all the necessary evidence, phones, hacked social media profiles exposed, files obtained, all showing the ugly truth of what the officers had done. Now, it was time to make them face the consequences of their actions. The tactical team had followed the officers to their homes, to their safe havens. They had mapped out their movements, their habits, the places where they felt untouchable. Maya and her team had watched from the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But this final step wasn't about secrecy. This was the moment to drag them into the light. The officers could no longer hide behind their badges. The plan was simple, but it carried immense weight. The officers would be confronted publicly, exposed for their crimes, and forced to reckon with the truth of what they had done to Nathaniel. It wasn't just about them being arrested. It was about public humiliation. It was about shattering their confidence. It was about giving them a taste of the fear they had instilled in Nathaniel. And now, it was their turn. Maya stood in the center of the warehouse. Her team gathered around her. Jordan, Eva, and Zach were all silent, their faces grim but resolute. Maya could see the determination in their eyes, but she also saw the unease. They were about to go up against men in power. Their confidence had been shaken, but they still had resources, connections, and influence. This would be the most dangerous part of the mission. Are we ready? Maya asked. Her voice steadied out. Jordan gave a curt nod. We're ready. Everything's in place. Tonight, we finish this, Maya said, her tone unwavering. She didn't need to say more. They all understood the stakes. It wasn't long before the plan came to fruition. The officers had unknowingly walked into Maya's trap. Riker, Sanders, and Dunlap were going about their normal business, completely unaware that their lives were about to be exposed. The phones they'd hidden, the accounts they thought they could wipe clean, the lies they had told themselves were no longer safe. Maya and her team had set the stage for this moment over the last few weeks. Their social media profiles, their personal messages, and their hidden histories had all been captured and cataloged. Now it was time for them to confront the reality of their actions. Riker's house was the first target. Maya had waited for this moment, her hands trembling with anticipation as she stepped toward his front door. The house, much like Riker himself, had been carefully constructed, neatly trimmed bush, a clean porch, a feeling of perfect normalcy. But underneath it all, Maya knew what lay beneath the surface. She wasn't going to let it stay hidden any longer. As the team approached, they could hear Riker's voice inside, speaking to his wife, discussing something trivial. They moved quickly, ensuring that there would be no time for him to react, no time for him to hide behind his badge. Maya felt a chill in her spine, but it wasn't fear. It was focus. This was her moment. She knocked once, calmly, but with intent. Riker opened the door, his usual smile faltering when he saw Maya standing there, her team just behind her. There was something in her eyes that made him pause. He looked at her as if trying to place her, but the recognition didn't come immediately. Can I help you? He asked, his tone guarded, though there was a hint of unease in his voice. Maya stepped forward, her eyes locking onto his. I'm not here for small talk, Riker. I'm here to talk about your actions, about the injustice you and your partners have caused, and I'm here to make sure everyone knows the truth. Riker's face twitched. He stepped back from the door, instinctively reaching for his phone. But before he could take it from his pocket, the screenshots of his actions began flashing on his own living room TV. The broadcast wasn't live. It was a recording one that Maya's team had ensured would run through his home's digital assistant, through the devices that were supposed to keep him connected to the world. The footage played on the screen, the body cam footage of Nathaniel's arrest, the abuse he had suffered, the moment his face hit the gravel, and then the texts Riker had sent, messages discussing the incident as if it were a casual matter. The officer had taken pride in his violence. The screen flashed red as the words, "My son's blood costs more than your badge," appeared in bold letters. The words Maya had sprayed across Riker's truck. They were a final reminder. Riker's expression went from confusion to realization. His face paled, his hands began to shake, and for the first time, Maya saw something she hadn't expected to see on him: fear. Not the kind of fear that came from being out of control, but the kind that came from knowing that there were no more places to hide. The walls of his carefully curated life began to crumble around him. His safe world was no longer safe. His family, his reputation, everything he had worked for, was exposed. His badge, the one thing that had shielded him, was now his curse. Maya stepped aside, allowing Eva to step forward. She turned on a small speaker in her hand, and the voice of Dunlap's wife began to play. She had recorded her husband's confession, one that had been shared under the stress of their lives unraveling. His admissions of how he and his partners had covered up the truth, had used their power to destroy lives for their own gain. Maya could see the panic building in Riker's eyes, but he still wasn't quite ready to fully break. He tried to back away, but Maya's team surrounded him, their expressions unyielding. Meanwhile, across town, Sanders and Dunlap had been caught in the same trap. Zach had infiltrated their home security systems, playing the confession audio to their devices and triggering recordings from their own cameras. It was a coordinated attack on their very lives. The officers now understood there was nowhere to go. There was no escape. In the next hour, the broadcast would be seen by thousands. News outlets would pick up on it. Social media would explode with the exposure of the officers' crimes. Maya's team had ensured that the world would see the raw truth, the injustice, and the corruption that had gone unchallenged for too long. Maya turned her gaze back to Riker, standing frozen at the threshold of his house. She stepped closer to him, her voice low, deliberate. "You were going to get away with it. You thought you could hide behind your badge, your family, your life. But you're not untouchable anymore. You hurt my brother. You broke him. And now, the whole world knows." Riker's hands trembled as he lowered his head, the weight of his actions sinking in. He wasn't just facing public humiliation. He was facing the reality that his entire career would now be a disgrace. Maya's voice remained steady. "This is just the beginning. You're going to face the consequences, whether you like it or not. And this time, it won't be just a slap on the wrist. It'll be your life that crumbles." The following days were filled with chaos. News outlets ran the story, and the world quickly turned its attention to the officers' actions. The public outrage was overwhelming, but it wasn't just about the fallout. For Maya, this moment marked the culmination of her journey, of her fight for justice. It wasn't just about making Riker and his partners pay for what they did to Nathaniel. It was about empowering the people who had been oppressed, who had been silenced for too long. Maya didn't stop there. The officers were now facing legal repercussions, but their lives had been forever altered. Their families were no longer safe. The fear they had instilled in others was now their own. The power had shifted. Maya stood outside the courthouse, looking up at the grand building. Her journey wasn't over. She had started something bigger, and she was ready to see it through. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about ensuring that no one like her brother would ever have to go through what Nathaniel did. She had made them feel what they had made her family feel. She had taken control back. And now the system was forced to answer. For once, the hunters had become the hunted. The silence in the hospital room felt like a weight pressing down on Maya's chest. The days after the exposure of the officers had been a whirlwind public outcry, news reports, and legal battles. The officers were facing charges, but it didn't feel like a victory. Not yet. Not until her brother was whole again. She stood outside the door of Nathaniel's room for a moment, just listening to the soft hum of machines and the occasional murmur of nurses outside. The atmosphere was heavy, but there was a small, flickering light of hope. She had won. Her plan had worked. The officers had been exposed, their lives shattered, their power taken away. They would no longer walk free, but that didn't bring her the peace she had imagined. When Maya finally stepped inside, the quiet of the room wrapped around her like a blanket. Nathaniel was awake, his eyes half closed in a haze of painkillers. The machines beeped softly beside him, the rhythmic sound a constant reminder of his fragility. His jaw was still wired shut, his face swollen beyond recognition, but there was a small flicker of recognition in his eyes when he saw her. Maya. His voice was strained, barely audible. She hadn't heard him say her name in days, and the sound of it made something inside her tighten. She sat down beside him, careful not to jostle the bed, and took his hand in hers. The coolness of his skin, the IVs and the bandages, reminded her of the battle they'd just fought, and the toll it had taken on both of them. "It's over, Nat," Maya whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You're going to be okay." Nathaniel tried to smile, but it was more of a grimace. His lips were cracked, his cheek bruised, but his eyes still carried the spark of the brother she'd always known. I remember everything," he said, his voice hoarse. I never thought it would be like this." His eyes flickered down to his hand, where Maya's fingers were wrapped tightly around his. Did you make them pay?" Maya looked at him for a long moment, the weight of the question heavy on her chest. Her little brother, the one who had always been innocent, always been the dreamer, was now facing a reality he would never have chosen. She had taken action, she had fought back, but the cost of that fight was still evident in the bruises on his body, the pain in his voice. "I did," Maya said softly. "They won't get away with it. They can't. The world knows what they did." Nathaniel's eyes closed for a moment, as if to process her words. "It's over then, right?" he asked, his voice so tired, so broken. "The fight?" Maya felt a lump form in her throat. The fight wasn't over, but that was something she wasn't sure how to explain to him yet. Not when he was lying there, so fragile, so vulnerable. Not when the system that had put him in that bed was still very much alive and well, still broken and still in place. "No," she said, her voice steady despite the rush of emotions threatening to spill over. "It's just the beginning. We've made a dent, but there's so much left to do. We've exposed them, but there are others, Nat, others who need to be held accountable." Nathaniel didn't respond right away. He shifted slightly, as if trying to get more comfortable, but the effort left him winded. He was still struggling, his body battered, but his spirit intact. It was a reminder of how strong he truly was, how strong they both were. Maya squeezed his hand, leaning closer. "I'm going to make sure this never happens again, Nat. To you. To anyone. The system needs to be broken, not just one officer at a time, but every single part of it that allows this to happen." Nathaniel's eyes opened again, still a bit clouded, but there was a small nod. A quiet understanding passed between them. His pain was not just physical anymore. It was emotional too, the scar of what had happened to him deep inside. But he trusted her, he always had. The days that followed were long, but there was progress. Maya continued her fight. She met with lawyers, speaking to anyone who would listen about the brokenness of the system. She continued to organize, not just in the streets, but behind the scenes. There was more to be done, more officers, more corruption, and more victims. But for the first time in a long while, Maya felt that justice was within reach. Nathaniel's recovery was slow. Each day she saw small improvements. He could sit up now without groaning in pain. He could speak a little clearer, and his doctors assured her that his jaw would heal, though it would take time. He wasn't out of the woods yet, but he was alive. And for Maya, that was enough for now. Late one evening, Maya returned to the hospital after another long day of meetings. As she entered Nathaniel's room, she found him staring out the window, his eyes unfocused, lost in thought. There was a quiet, reflective air about him. Now, his face less rigid, his shoulders less tense. "Hey," Maya said, smiling softly as she approached his bed. "How's the view?" Nathaniel looked over at her, his expression weary but light. Better than the hospital room. They shared a quiet laugh, one that felt like a thread of normalcy amidst all the chaos. Maya sat down beside him, looking out the window, the evening sun painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. "You know, you're going to get through this, right?" Nathaniel didn't answer right away. His gaze remained fixed on the horizon, his thoughts seemingly far away. But finally, after a few moments, He spoke, his voice softer, more thoughtful. I don't know if it's over yet. I still think about what happened, about what's coming. But I think we made a difference, right? His voice wavered slightly, like he was trying to convince himself. Maya nodded, her gaze drifting out. The window as well. We did, but there's still so much to fix. This isn't just about getting revenge. It's about changing the system, and that's going to take time. Nathaniel turned his head, studying her face as if trying to see through her resolve. What's next for you, Maya? What happens after all this is over? Maya's heart clenched. The question hung in the air like a challenge. There was a part of her that wanted to say she was done, that she could finally relax and live a normal life. But she knew that wasn't the truth. I don't know, she said after a long pause, but I'll keep fighting. For you, for everyone. I won't let what happened to you be forgotten. The world needs to change, and I'm going to make sure it does. The room fell silent again, but this time it wasn't filled with tension or fear. It was filled with understanding. Maya had taken the first step in a battle she wasn't sure she could win. But now, looking at Nathaniel, seeing the tiny glimmer of hope in his eyes, she knew it wasn't over. The system was still broken. The officers hadn't been brought to justice yet, and there would always be more to fight for. But for the first time in what felt like a long time, Maya allowed herself to breathe. Her journey was far from complete. But she had already changed the course of their lives, and for Nathaniel, that was enough. For now, they could heal Dot, but tomorrow, the fight would continue.